wrist, forearm, wrist, hand, and fingers. So, like from here down. All right, contusion injuries to the forearm. The forearm is constantly exposed to bruising and contusions in contact, just like the elbow. You really don't protect it. The ulna receives because it is in the defensive mode. Like if you watch those TV shows on television, or of course, there are TV shows on television. But if you watch TV shows like First 48, and they say, "Oh, they have defensive wounds." Well, defensive wounds are usually to this side because that's how you protect yourself. So, varying degree of pain, swelling, and varying hematomas, followed by rice. You can also put the key on there and have price by protecting it and allowing them to play by covering it up with pads or orthoplast, which is a whole lot better than just putting a pad on there. Followed by ice the next day. Protect the forearm. Full length pad is best. But as we said, you can put a hard shell on it. Now, here's the whole thing about that is like way back in the day when they had leather helmets and I was playing ball. I didn't like those deals because you're constantly pulling them up. So your other thought is just take some foam, wrap the pre-wrap around the foam, and then just tape it to their skin. Then they're protected and they're not being hindered and pestered the entire game. So a fracture to the forearm, a particularly common among active children and youths as a result of a blow or a fall on an outstretched arm or outstretched hand. Fractures to the ulna or the radius alone are much rarer than simultaneous fractures to both. So we see this cast. Now that's just going to be one. When you get radius involved, it must come up here to the bicep. So you don't do a supination and pronation. So a direct blow on the forearm can result in a fracture to the ulna. Athlete who experiences an audible pop or crack followed by moderate to severe pain, swelling, and disability. Number one sign of a fracture is swelling, immediate profuse swelling. Okay. Localized tenderness, edema, ecchymosis, which is that, coloring stuff. And then crepitus. What's crepitus? Crepitus. Nothing in, what's that medical term? Didn't have anything in medical term. All right. So we'll use a broomstick. Okay. So if we got a broomstick here, and that's the bone. Of course, that's like on a dinosaur. Now, what we want to do to find out, we need to isolate the bone. So you got to know your anatomy. Palpate or feel. Okay. So where on your great big broomstick bone does it hurt? Right there. So I'm going to go on one side and then the other. And I will take the bone and go back and forth. One going up, one going down. Now, if there is a fracture, you very well can feel some sandy, gritty type stuff going on. And that's the bones rubbing over each other. All right? So that is crepitus, the gritty, sandy kind of stuff. You can feel crepitus if you're doing for chondromalacia of your knee, that stuff on under your kneecap. You can feel it in our arthritic joints. You can feel it in shoulders when people go around and you say, oh, there's some crepitus. So it's just a popping, cracking, sandy, gritty type stuff, and it's not very smooth. So if you feel that crepitus, very well have a fracture. More than likely you will. So price is applied. I know it doesn't have the P on there, but we're going to add it to it. Initially, price, protect, rest, ice compression, followed by splinting until definitive care is available, which could be a long arm or fiberglass cast, followed by program. How about a program? By a program of rehabilitation. All right, here's a nice little acronym. If you like this acronym, use it. If you want to make one up on your own, fine, make one up on your own. But Happy Cat Tom took pie to little sister. Meaning, hamate, capitate, trapezoid, trapezium, pisiform, tricatal, lunate, and scaphoid. Now, on your test, you're going to see this picture, and you're going to name them from memory. Okay? So, remember what they are. You can start by knowing that the scaphoid, also known as the navicular, is going to be on the radial side. It's in your anatomical snuff box. So we're going to get into the scaphoid here in a bit. But those there are your 8 little bones, and they're itty bitty bones. It's on the thumb side, radial side. Okay? So, a lot of times people blow off wrist injuries, and they go, and this is one of my pet peeves about athletic trainers. They say, "Oh, heck, you sprained your wrist." Well, what do ligaments do? They hold. No, ligaments. They hold bone to bone. So we're going to have ligaments in between here holding bone to bone. So all of those have a whole bunch of little itty bitty ligaments. A sprain is a tear to the ligament. All right. So how are you going to be able to know? There's not, you can't like do a valgus or a varus test over there and say, hey, yeah, well, you got a sprain between the hamate and the capitate. No. So I go up there. I'm in Wiley. The trainer that was there before me, he quit. He moved to Hutto. So here comes one brother. And the brother comes in. He says, hey, can you look at my wrist? I said, yeah, sure. I said, what's the matter with your wrist? He says, well, it hurts all the time. I said, what happened? He says, I fell down on it and during football season, and the other trainer told me I sprained my wrist. I said, did you fall this way? He says, yeah. I said, and has it gotten any better? No. Does it hurt right here? Yes. I said, I think you've got a broken bone. These bones are, I said, so it's been a year. These bones are small, so they don't have a really good blood supply. So if you get a fracture in one of those bones, you need to make sure it's taken care of properly and immediately. So he goes to the doctor, and then his brother, a year younger, comes in next week. He says, opposite wrist. My wrist has been bothering me just like my brother's. And I said, okay. I said, how long has it been? Well, it was a little later than his, but it was last football season. And now we're in August, September. I said, how did you fall? He says, I felt like that. Lo and behold, he was hurting on the same place on the opposite side. Both of them went to the orthopedist. They did bone scans, and both of them had scaphoid fractures to the opposite wrist. Both of them ended up in cast. One of them started to heal. The other one didn't. So they had to cut open a window in his cast, and they would put these electrodes on there for bone growth stimulator, which is not cheap. All right. And eventually what happened is he actually had to go in and have surgery. They'll pull a piece of bone out of your hip, and then they'll put it together with a different piece of bone graft. Not a fun thing to go through where now he's wearing his cast and etc. for 6 months, possibly more. So it's important that you don't blow off these little carpal bones and think, well, they're so small that they don't ever get broken. Unlike your pinkies and your dips and your pips and your phalanges on these little ones, yes, it's harder to break the smaller bones, but these have so much capabilities of being crushed by falling down and people putting their hands down. So if you crush them, you're going to have a problem. Oh, there it is. So know about Happy Cat Tom took pie to little sister. Tomorrow, I don't want you to know the names of the bones, but I will want you to know the acronym. So start talking about Happy Cat Tom. Remind yourself. So here's your movements of your wrist. You have flexion, extension, radial deviation, ulnar deviation. We have supination and pronation. Here, here, but supination and pronation. Those are your wrist movements. So we're going to put down on there. Which one is this? Is that one flexion or extension? Well, then if I put this one on here instead, somebody might think, oh, well, that's flexion. Not necessarily. The thing about those little bones and getting a fracture in them, though, is that these movements can be diminished permanently, and you can lose strength in your hand and get arthritis. So there's your movement of wrist. Flexion, extension, radial deviation, ulnar deviation. You can lose your motion. You can get diminished motion from the arthritic and the changes in the bone from not taking care of it. Not a great thing. All right, but you do have wrist sprains. A sprain is the most common injury to the wrist, although that's probably because so many people just say, yeah, we're going to mark it down as a wrist sprain, and we're etc. And the most poorly managed in sports. I believe that wholeheartedly. Falling on a hyperextended, so this is extended, and then hyper is even farther. When we fall on a hyperextended wrist, is the most common cause of wrist sprains. But a violent flexion or torsion will also tear supporting ligaments. So there's also deviation, ulnar deviation, can do some fun stuff, and same with the radial deviation. You start, huh? It hurt? So, so she holds her thumbs and throws it down, and then she comes in and she complains of pain, swelling, and difficulty moving the wrist, tenderness, swelling, and limited range of motion. Always refer to your physician for an x-ray. Now, here's the whole thing. Happy Tom Cat, all those little bones are little bones. So with them being little bones, here's the thing. You might not see a fracture immediately. So she comes in, she complains about her wrist. We're going to treat you as a sprained wrist and see if it gets better. Now, it takes 7 to 10 days for you to get an x-ray on your wrist because you don't see the fracture, you see the healing. And so once you start seeing the calcium fill in where the fracture was on these little bones, and you say, oh, yeah, you had a break. So you got to take it, get protect it for that week, and then go get your x-ray. Because if you just send them to a regular old radiologist who's not seeing a lot of orthopedic type deals or active sports medicine type deals, they're going to look at it and they're going to say, oh, yeah, and it's not broken. Well, it very well may be. So treat with price. Put your orthoplast on it. Put the foam around it. Analgesics. What are analgesics? Anybody know what an analgesic is? We talked about just this last week. An analgesic is anything that, anything that reduces pain. Okay? Start your hand strengthening exercises and tape your wrist for support. Now, when you're taping your wrist, if you'll take and look at your wrist, you've got these strings that are here, right? Well, you also have some strings on the top. That's because your hand gets its strength from moving back and forth from up here in the forearm. And then there's a whole bunch of pulleys called tendons that come down and end up at the very end of your hand. You can actually take your hand and push against it, and you could feel those tendons in your palm. just as well as see it on the top. So those tendons have to have room in order to do their job. So when you see me tell those boys to say, and of course you girls, I know you don't want to do it this way, but what do I tell them? I say, open your hand and push on me. And the reason they open their hand is to where the wrist, those tendons, have enough room to do what they're supposed to do. If I just let him put his hand up here and I tape it and I tape it tight, one is the circulation is going to have a problem, and then two is that he's not going to be able to actually open their hand all the way, or may not be able to make a fist all the way because I have restricted that motion of the tendon. The other reason why I tell them to push is that way your hand's not going all around Montgomery County and I'm not chasing it. When they're pushing, it keeps it in one spot and I'm able to pull the tape easier. So, what do we have here? The scaphoid fracture. And it also has another name. The common name is like navicular. You have a navicular in your foot, so we call it the scaphoid, where that way when we talk to the doctor or whatnot, then we know we're not talking about foot. We're talking about right here, the scaphoid. One of the greatest things is if you'll take your thumb, all right, see your hand, open your hand, and see that anatomical sniff box, so you can feel one tendon and then the other. You'll take your hand on the other hand, put it right there, all right, and I want you to really push down on there. Somebody ever touches you, grabs you, holds your hand, and you want away, you take that thumb and you dig it in that scaphoid, they will let loose. It's a nice little pressure point that is a good thing to know. Just sort of like the top of your foot. If you stomp on somebody's foot, they're not able to chase you, especially if you had pumps on. But, not that I've tried it with pumps, but you all might. Good. So, most frequently fractured bone of the carpal bones is usually caused by having your hand out and falling down on it. Okay? And what happens is the scaphoid gets crushed between the radius and the second row of carpal bones, and it's often thought to be sprained, but it's not. And again, you're not going to probably see that it's fractured until 7 to 10 days later when you start getting. So as you can see with this picture, there's the scaphoid, all right, and you see the radius coming down into it. So imagine that you fall down, great big bone, it can handle the force, it comes down and smashes onto the scaphoid. There's the anatomical snuff box, the little triangle there that you see. So right below that is the scaphoid. If you need to get someone's attention, that is a great place to grab. And there is a picture of how the radius will come down and smash it. Fun, huh? Excuse me? You can probably do it that way, but it's a whole lot easier to do it with extension than with flexion. Here it is again, where the navicular scaphoid bone is getting fractured by the radius coming down on it hard. Where are we? Here we go. All right. Signs of a recent scaphoid fracture include swelling in the area of the carpal bones, severe tenderness over the scaphoid bone, or in the anatomical snuff box. The scaphoid pain is elicited by upward pressure exerted on the long axis of the thumb by the radial and by radial flexion. So, radial deviation or radial flexions here, that's certainly going to hurt. So, refer to the physician. Get an x-ray, put them in a cast. You can still play football in a cast. Probably can't throw the football. And I'd say that you actually can catch the football because, and I've seen it happen, we had one kid who had a scaphoid fracture and he played tight end. He actually caught the ball better after he got a cast on than what he did before. because he had to concentrate more. One of those lazy-minded kids that, you know, yeah, I can just reach up there and it sticks to my hand. It doesn't do that. You know that. So surgery also may be needed if the bone does not heal. And if that's the case, they'll come in, they'll take a little piece of bone out, or they'll put a little pin in it. All right. We're not going to do triangular fibrocartilage complex today. So we'll do that tomorrow because that's a lot of stuff.